No matter who you are or where you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. Thanks. In the world that we live in, we struggle with wanting to do spiritual practice if we think that it's something that we're adding on to our lives. If we think that we are adding the pursuit of God into our busy lives, that sounds pretty daunting. But we need to remember that spiritual practice really is allowing us to slow down enough so that we notice the presence that's always been there with us. I've been using this quote from Ilia Delio pretty much in every talk that I've done since Bill used it the first time in here. And that is that everything in existence from the cosmic level to the microscopic level is evolving, creative, expansive, and entangled. When presenting some information about Richard Rohr's Cosmic Egg, about our development from my story, our story, and the story, we can look at just telling our own story can become in this evolution of understanding. I can tell you my story, and I have in here, and I could only get into it a little ways before I begin to tell your story. And the farther that I go in development and the more I notice, I begin to understand that no matter who's telling the story, we get to a point where we realize it's all the story. It's the same story for all of us. And we realize that as we let go of our individual perception of our lives, as we embrace the universal nature of our story, then we realize, as Richard Rohr says, that we're falling upward into the arms of each other. This quote came from the conference. I was watching the conference on the Francis factor from the CAC, and I love this line: if you're not part of the whole, you are dividing it. So this morning, I'm going to challenge us to look at what separates us and what causes us to divide the whole. I've talked about this a few times in here before, really focusing on how our ego responds to the stimulus that we have, whether we're driving on the freeway or asking our children to do something or, just daily life activities, that we respond from our thoughts and our fears and our memories of the past and our concerns for the future, rather than being connected to what's right in front of us. And those moments where we're using the past or the future to think about what's going on in a different way, that's what causes our suffering. And just like the Buddhists say, it's the thoughts that cause us suffering. This quote I have heard attributed to Darwin and to Rollo May, and I'm not quite sure who said it, but humans are the only species that move faster when lost. And in our culture, we have so much emphasis on intellectual pursuits and achievements, and we define ourselves by what we do, not who we are. And so if we keep putting something into that engine, we make ourselves very busy. It's almost as if, I don't know about you, but it's been true in my life, where I feel like I'm running full speed in the woods, lost and alone. A friend of mine and I were talking last night about the loneliest times in our lives has been when our children are really small. And here we are, surrounded by people all the time, and we're never alone unless we, get to go to the bathroom by ourselves. And yet, it was the loneliest period of my life because there was no time for self-connection. It was busy, busy, busy. And so running through the woods empty is where we find ourselves sometimes. So I've used an image similar to this before, but I wanted to reinvent it a little bit. And hopefully, I don't have a laser pointer, but maybe you can follow along. So the circle in the middle is what I'm calling our soul, or the divine indwelling, the inner observer. And around that, the thin lines represent the wounds that we have. These wounds can develop in early childhood. You know, the first time you cry as a child and your mother or your father doesn't respond as quickly as you'd hope, and it changes our perspective about what the world is really about. These wounds can happen anytime in our lives. But the nodes that I've drawn in around that are the thoughts that we develop about those wounds, and they can take on a life of their own, right? Our perceptions or our ideas about what those wounds mean to us and who we are. Just outside of that, in the line that's written in blue, I'm calling it a mind field of our fear, our limiting beliefs, things that our ego has established as a protective device, things that we think is protecting us. These things could be the idea that I'm not good enough, the fear of scarcity, thinking I've got to go out there and, you only live once, so get everything you can for yourself before someone else takes it, those kinds of things. The desire that we have for control is part of that ego protection layer. And then outside of that, in the pink, written in the pink, are things that, in my looking at this, I feel like society plays off of that ego response that we have. So that when we're fearful, society will say, if you're not good enough, here's some new makeup that came out that'll make you look prettier. Here's a way that you can, work on your image to make you feel better about yourself if you think you're not good enough. Here's some information about what's going on in your local environment that will make you feel like if you want to compare yourself to others, there's this messaging that's happening that feeds into that ego control. So I've noticed in my life when I was in college, I noticed that my perception of reality was greatly influenced by what I was spending my time on, what I was attending to. For instance, I realized a couple of years later, I reflected on how dramatic my life seemed because I was watching soap operas in between my classes in college. I don't know if anybody's ever realized the impact that kind of messaging has on the way we perceive the world around us. I mean, that was the only time in my life I ever watched soap operas, and that was the most dramatic time in my life. So we need to be aware that our energy is following what we're attending to. I think in the Bible, that would be relating to seek and ye shall find. Pay attention to what you're looking for, because you can find it. There's plenty of messaging out there to find it. So what are you paying attention to? So the orange zigzag line is what I'm referring to as this trap that we get in from living on the outside, where we're really focused on making ourselves feel better at an ego level, and we're responding to the messaging that's on the TV or in our circles, and then it pulls us in and helps us remember those wounds and the thoughts that we have about it. And then we jump back out, and we just spend so much energy jumping back and forth from at the surface level of our ego and the messaging that pulls us back into ourselves rather than giving us the freedom to connect with others. So this graphic is representing where our energy follows our attention when we become more open. If we are able to look at our wounds through a spiritual lens, if we can practice healing and grieving and connection and really open up space for the divine to have a graceful interaction with our wounds, then we can move beyond that line. You see, those circles of thoughts have been minimized. We've done some work to take away our attachments to our perceptions about those wounds. When you reach a certain age and you realize that your parents were doing the best that they could, and because your mom didn't respond the way you thought she should, when you get older and you realize that she was doing the very best that she could, and you can begin to see what else was going on in her life, that thought about that wound that has defined you has an opportunity to shrink and make space for us to move past that wound. I've drawn in our ego response as a blue dotted line and the societal messaging as a pink dotted line to show that when we do spiritual practice, when we do meditation or whatever form helps us let go, even turning off the television or not watching the news could be called a spiritual practice at this point, right? Or not watching soap operas anymore. But we allow the openness by letting go to let our soul move past those messages and those things that have been defining us and separating us from each other. So in Wayne Dyer's movie, The Shift, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this movie, but Dr. Wayne Dyer passed away, I think it's been 2 weeks ago, and if you go on his Facebook page, they are posting links to be able to watch his movies for free right now. So the movie The Shift is an amazing production. Artistically and spiritually, I was really impressed by it. And it's all about transformation. It's like being able to watch a movie on ordinary life, is the way I felt about it. And they weave a bit of documentary interview with storytelling and follow the journey of several different people throughout the course. But one of the things that he brings up in this movie is that when we are living in the image of moving from our ego and bouncing around from fear and not being willing to be open and be truly ourselves in the world, sometimes things happen to us that snap us out of that cycle. It could be the birth of a child. It could be falling in love. It could be something that's not sunshine and rainbows, and it could be a tragedy or something that causes us suffering. But at those moments that totally make all of that busy stuff that we're doing, it makes us realize that's not real life. What's real may be really, really good or really, really bad or something just totally different that snaps us out of it. Those are the moments where grace can pop in. When grace does pop in. I've had that experience a few times. And one of them was when I helped Eli with his mitzvah project, which I've talked about in here before. But so as Bill does, I'm recognizing that this is repeated material. But Eli did his mitzvah in such a way that was so creative. I think it was co-created. I think he was really, really connected with Spirit. He wanted to present to his friends information about the Holocaust because he felt like it wasn't taught enough in their history classes, and he wanted to present the Holocaust to his peers in a way that wasn't informational, it was experiential. And he said that what we have to do is we have to do an art project, because people can't do art if they're not connected with the heart. You can't do art from your head, is what he was saying. So the idea that he came up with was he did interviews with Holocaust survivors. He edited a video and put them together, presented it to his friends, and he himself, he took a pair of Converse tennis shoes that were white, and he decorated one shoe in the darkness, in the suffering, in the wounds, and he decorated the other shoe with the reconciliation, with light, with inspiration, with hope, with the love that survived. And he did a 1-mile walking meditation, a walking in their shoes, and alternating his steps and being very mindful of this balance of suffering and reconciliation in darkness and light. It's my hope that someday he's able to do this process with his friends. I think it would be one of the most wonderful things to see a bunch of teenagers walking in the shoes of the Holocaust experience. So another point in my life where I was just like what Wayne Dyer calls a quantum moment, one of those times where things just kind of slice through your ego. I have a family member who suffers from mental illness, and at the point of the psychotic break, everything seemed to shatter in that ego realm. It's as if that all of the story that we tell ourselves just flew out the window for this person. And it had the same effect on us, because you don't realize how much you're relying on the world or your family or the people around you to act a certain way, to believe a certain way, to be there in a certain way until it's gone completely. And so in witnessing this, it became very clear to me that the soul was inside was suddenly 100% outside. And this relative of mine sounded as though they were in this class with us. It sounded like Bill Curley, every word that was coming out of this person's mouth, and I was just in awe. So what I wanted to share was that between those two graphics that I showed you, between this living on the outside of ourselves, living from this shell and the persona that we do, to opening ourselves up and living from the spirit, is a cycle. We don't get to just, without a psychotic episode, I think, have it all go away. We have the opportunity to practice opening, to be more mindful of those choices that we make that shut ourselves down, that live superficially, or we choose love and we use faith to get beyond our fears, to open up. And that as this cycles, it's just like the seasons, just like the rising and falling of the tide. Our egos constrict, and then our soul expands. And once we've had these opportunities, these moments of grace, there's a longing that stirs inside of us to get back to that place again, where we're connected, where we are truly alive. And so this is my prop that I brought. I don't have the light for it, so you'll have to watch it in this video. But if you consider these fins that are outside of this light fixture as our ego, and we feel safe when it's closed in and it's taking a shape that we can understand. But as we do spiritual practice, or as we connect with these moments of grace, we can let that ego go. We can let that protective device go, and we can allow the light inside of us to move past the shell and to be part of the light that exists in each other, the divine indwelling and sacred mystery. So what I'm proposing is that when we choose to do spiritual practice, we are choosing to practice opening up, to letting go of what separates us. At the center of all of everything, and I'm using this image to kind of go back to what Ilia Delio says about the evolving, expanding, creative, that at the center of everything is love and grace, and that we just lack the awareness of it. So when we practice, we're practicing being aware. We have the opportunity to use elements of grace to reach that place and to practice through creative movement, art, through dialogue, deep dialogue, meaningful connection with each other, through experience and community. Experiential and contemplative practices move us from our head to our heart, from our ego to our soul. They move us beyond analysis and an evaluation to healing and transformation. The labyrinth is one example of how we can increase our awareness. We let go of our limiting beliefs. We notice, if you've ever walked the labyrinth with other people, you can notice that you're moving in rhythm with other people, and it's a walking meditation. Another spiritual practice that I like that just helps get out of your head is contemplative watercolor. So here's a little video on how simple it is to just wet the paper, which can be a metaphor for making your life more fluid. And just simply noticing one point in time, one stroke on the paper. It can be quite fun to just see where the paint goes. Yoga is a way of holding diverse energy and focus on the present moment, synchronizing the mind, body, and spirit, and helping us recognize the spirit in others. In movement, we can move past energy blocks that we carry in our body from all of this living from the outside or the wounding that we have. Movement can be expressive. It can help us create more balance and release those energy blocks that we have. I like this because this was a yoga practice, and just the thought of just shaking things off just really, I thought, went with the talk. In spiritual direction, we listen deeply to help find how God is working in the directee's life. We hold space to connect with those inner longings that we have and begin to see the subtle nudges of spirit. So in Wayne Dyer's movie, The Shift, he's really talking about shifting from ambition to meaning. We need both action and contemplation. So how do we live simultaneously in the society that we're in while somehow tapping into a contemplative monastic existence? I think that in the past there were a lot of nuns and monks praying for the world and holding that space. And I feel like that, it seems to me like that population has been dwindling over the years. I think we're called to bring that into our daily lives. Because as Ilia Dilio said in the presentation at the Francis Factor, every thought that we have, whatever energy we've put out there, simply in a thought, is affecting the energy in the world somewhere. And I think we're called to bring some of that monastic tradition into our daily lives to help put a little more positive energy into the world. And so it's not only about helping ourselves, but it reaches beyond that. So I have not been tracking the time. Okay. I wanted to show you my prop. I'll leave this slide up. So I made a prototype of this last Saturday night, trying to get ready for the event last night. And I was thinking about how we hold on to our attachments, our thoughts and the suffering that we do. Our perception of reality is what we hold on to when we're trying to control our lives. And so I made this prototype out of a wiffle ball and was putting construction paper over the holes and a light inside of it, and then stringing yarn through that construction paper so that it would all pull and close off. And then when you let go of the yarn, and the construction paper hopefully it would open up, which it didn't in my prototype. But so then I was working diligently on that last Saturday night, and then we came to Ordinary Life last week, and afterwards I was like, I think there's a light fixture that does that. I think I've seen this before. So this is the light fixture from IKEA, and what I've done is put images, which were really easy to find in magazines, about what our culture tells us, because that's where it is. So there are images around this middle area that represent the messaging that we get from outside of ourselves, and how it plays with the fears that we have inside that keep us wanting to be closed off and protecting ourselves. So these are being scared, being under fire, struggling with what's next. There was something, a message about Texas A&M, winners in the classroom, eat 'em up. I mean, there was like very competitive and violent messaging, and, you know, all of these emergency, and one of them said something about, are you as big as something else, which, you know, is a person that's under 5 foot tall. I was like, well, maybe I don't need to be, but there's just a whole lot of competitive messaging here, and these are the things that we respond to that make us feel like we don't want to be vulnerable in this world. So what this little thing does is, when we are scared and attached to our beliefs, I can't seem to get that, there we go, it's as if we're holding on tight to the way we perceive the world and to our thoughts. And then when we let go, we have the opportunity, whether it's a moment of grace or through spiritual practice and intention, we begin to open up and we let our light out. And if you've ever been in a situation with, like we have in Conspire, where you get to be around others who are open, it's amazing how church happens, how community and how our light shines together when we're in a space where we all feel comfortable to be vulnerable and open and moving past our limiting beliefs. And so that is what I wanted to share today. You are welcome to come up and take a closer look if you want, but I have images on the inside of the things that we all have inside of us, those things that are our spiritual connection to the divine. Like the beauty in the world and the connections that we have with each other, and those things that we long for on the inside, that others might not get to see if we spend so much time closed off and protected. I also kind of feel like this is like the Death Star from Star Wars. So there's a little incentive for you. It's, if you want to do spiritual practice, all I'm asking you to do is get in there and explode the Death Star. You can do it. That's all I have for today. Does anybody have any questions? Sorry, John. Yes. The ones on the slideshow, yes. Yeah, those are my paintings and photography. And I think that was a really good segue for me to share a little bit of my story if we have some time. I love using my own imagery, not because I want people to see how cool I am, because that's not it at all. It's very relevant to the talk that I gave this morning. I've had experiences in my life that gave me the limiting belief that I'm not an artist, that I'm not creative. I actually had a college professor tell me that my project was the ugliest project he'd ever seen in his career when I was in architecture school. And I'd forgotten. After that, I literally forgot that I took independent art lessons as a child. I just completely said I'm not an artist, and that was it. I started my career in architecture as a photographer because I felt like the only thing I did photography before that, so I had that desire to do photography again, but in my mind I made the connection that the only way I'm going to use this architecture is through photography, where I'm admiring the work of a real artist. Not that I was ever going to be a real designer, but that the best I could do would be to photograph someone else's work, because I could see the beauty in other people's work. So over the past 3 or 4 years in doing spiritual practice and coming to ordinary life and beginning to let go of those limiting beliefs, and through kind of the journey I've shared in here, falling flat on my face, literally at times, that I started taking a watercolor class at the Art League, and something came alive in me. And so the reason I share this is not just because I have them and I don't want to spend a lot of money on stock photography, but that it's a constant reminder to me to put myself out there. It's also a constant reminder to me of where I was when I painted every one of those images. I was not living inside the Death Star, all closed off. I was allowing myself to be in the moment. It wasn't about the end product. It's about the journey. It's about creating the art and the space that I was in when I created the art. And so I couldn't put my pencil on the paper or my paintbrush on the paper until I began to let go of those limiting beliefs. And the more that I do that practice, the more free I am to express. And it's still not about sharing. It's still not about the label that I put on myself about whether or not I'm an artist. To me, it's like a badge of courage, not a piece of art, that I share it in here, to remind myself to continue being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Yes. So I do centering prayer. I do centering prayer here on Sundays with our group at 8:30, and then I try to do it daily, but that doesn't always happen. I also do the Ignatian practice of the awareness examen, which is a rewinding of the day. You do it in the middle of the day, and you do it at the end of the day before you go to bed. So it's a very quick practice, but I've started doing it with the staff at Christ Church Cathedral during the week, during the middle of the workday, which to me is like when I need it the most. So all you do is you get into a contemplative state. You try to let go of the thoughts that are racing through your head, and connect with presence, connect with the divine indwelling, and rewind your day from the noon hour all the way back to when you woke up, and think about the moments that you've had, and find the places where you were living closed off and the places where you were living more open. And you can settle in on one of the experiences that you've had and let that become a prayer for you. For me, a lot of times what comes to me are interactions that I've had with our children. So if I've had a bad, if I felt like I had a bad mommy morning getting people to school, those things pop in my head. And I allow that to become my prayer, not only for relieving myself of guilt, but also to make an intention for how I'm going to be present with them when I see them again or the next morning. And you do the same thing at night. And it's totally specific to where you are each day and what your experience is. You may notice that, simple things like how you drove on the freeway, all of a sudden you're paying attention to it. And then you have the ability to do it differently, right? So that's another one of the practices that I really enjoy, because it literally takes 5 or 10 minutes at noon and 5 or 10 minutes at night. And then there are others. I love doing watercolor and, other things that I think are spiritual practice. Honestly, I think anytime we have the intention to slow down and to be in the moment with each other, it's practice. It's spiritual practice. Yeah, so what I've been doing when I teach Ordinary Life is I take this audio and try to edit as many ums out of it as I can. And then I sync it up with the slideshow, and I make a movie out of it, and I put it on YouTube. So you can see the slides and hear my talk simultaneously. No, it's Brooke SP98 is my channel, but there'll be a link in Bill's summary to the talk. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. I appreciate all of the input and for just having a safe place for me to pull that chain and open up as well. Thank you.